Every edition of Dungeons & Dragons is someone's favorite and someone else's most hated. One man's gold dragon is another man's troglodyte. And if you've been in this hobby for any amount of time, then you already know this is one of the most dangerous rankings that I could possibly make, but I want to do it anyway. I want to attempt to answer a question that a lot of people do ask. Which edition of D&D is actually the best? This ranking is not about nostalgia. It's about what each edition does well and not so well. One important thing to keep in mind is just how much D&D has changed over time. There have been so many revisions and new releases that it's complicated to even figure out how to define the editions. So for the purpose of this ranking, I'm classifying the editions as follows. In early D&D in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there are three. There's original D&D, od&d. There's first edition, and there's second edition. Then in middle D&D, which is the 2000s, we have 3E and 4E. Then into modern D&D in the 2010s and 2020s, we have 5E. So a bit of explanation about these. D&D's early era was about survival, DM rulings, and player ingenuity. Original D&D was released in 1974, and it evolved out of the medieval fantasy war game Chainmail. Then we have First Edition, 1E, which is a very loose term. It encompasses 1977's D&D and Advanced D&D. Those are two different books. There's the basic D&D with simpler rules, and then AD&D with the more complex rules. There are also the basic and expert versions in 1978, and the basic, expert, companion, master, and immortal series from 1983, and the rules cyclopedia from 1991. Basically, 1E is a catch-all term for the initial versions of the game that spawned out of original D&D. Next is second edition, 2E, which is technically Advanced D&D second edition. This was released in 1989. It also has a revised version from 1995. So all these editions I've named so far were published by TSR. That's the TSR era, 70s, 80s, 90s. So after this, Wizards of the Coast takeover. This brings us to middle D&D, in which the game became about character builds and rules balance and system mastery. 3E came out in the year 2000, though not long after shifted to the revised 3.5E in 2003. Then 4th edition came out in 2008, and in 2010 there's the D&D Essentials line, which is sort of a 4.5E but not quite. Then we come to modern D&D, which really takes into account things like accessibility, flow, and broad appeal. 5E launched in 2014 and became the most successful edition of the game yet. And in 2024, the 5.5E revision was released, though it wasn't until 2026 that Wizards of the Coast actually started calling it 5.5E. As I worked on making this video, I quickly realized that it actually needs to be two different rankings, a rules ranking and a style ranking. So the rules ranking is how functional, usable, and enjoyable the system is. The style ranking is the quality of the art, the tone, and the lore. So let's dive into these dual rankings of the editions of Dungeons & Dragons. Starting off with the rules ranking. In 6th place, I'm going with original D&D. At the very bottom is od&d, born out of the Chainmail war game. And the system assumes that you have the Chainmail rules to go along with it. Now, could you play od&d without Chainmail? You could. It would just be more of a looser framework, and they would be ideas that the GM would have to use to essentially create his own game. Original D&D is a starting point. It gets the ball rolling for the game. It has some great ideas and really is a landmark of a game. But you are expected to fill in major gaps, and as a game system, it's not the most functional. In 5th place, we have First Edition. 1E improves things in many ways. It's a complete game that doesn't rely upon chainmail anymore, and many of the components are explained better, and they have more of the information that the players and the DMs need. But it's still a bit crude, a bit inconsistent. It's also notably hard to parse through. There are so many walls of text and all kinds of fiddly rules all over the place. Just looking at character creation makes my eyes glaze over. Sure, this was a new frontier, but why did the designers have to make things so complicated, so wordy? Why did they have to make it such a pain to go through? Again, there are some strong ideas in here, but they just don't flow. They're lost and buried within the unnecessary complexity. In fourth place, second edition, 2E Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. It sets out to improve the poor organization and the cumbersome tediousness of first edition, which the 2E designer correctly describes in the 2E books as unwieldy, but still a lot of fun. So, does 2E succeed in this task? Slightly. It smooths out and strengthens some of the rules, it improves the formatting a bit, but nowhere near enough. It's still really verbose, still clunky, still bewildering. Character creation is still labyrinthine and tedious, instead of inspiring and flowing. The biggest improvement probably is in the Monstrous Manual, which got the formatting substantially better, with the stat blocks easier to reference and read, and the layout is more organized and the monsters don't constantly spill over onto multiple pages. 2E AD&D improves on first edition, but it's still unfortunately cumbersome and bogged down. In third place, we have 4th edition. Skipping ahead a bit, we come to 4E, which was Wizards of the Coast's response to the explosive popularity of World of Warcraft and online RPGs. In many ways, 4E was a misstep for the game. It took things in a very different direction than ever before, and that left many people dissatisfied. But there were some who really liked 4E, because if we look at this game on its own merits, it is a solid, well-made RPG. In hindsight, Wizards of the Coast should have marketed this game as its own standalone, minis-based RPG. They could have called it something like D&D Tactics or D&D Battle for the Nintir Vale. It would have carried its own weight for a good few years, and meanwhile, WotC could have developed an improved version of the highly popular 3E, and then called that 4th edition. Anyway, 4E is very tight mechanically. It has clear rules, clear formatting, it's easy to parse through, it has strong balance, though perhaps too balanced to the point of being predictable. This is a very rules-based game with little ambiguity and that high level of balance. And ironically, this is both its strength and its weakness, because when it's too predictable, too rigid, too gamey, it becomes overstructured, and that robs the sense of magic, especially from the spellcasters. But at the same time, it does allow for some really interesting, crunchy, tactical play for the martial characters. Another flaw in 4E is its math. Now, it's not as out of control as 3E, but there are two major issues. One is that the game has too much fiddly number crunching that the DM and the players have to do on the fly. Round by round, turn by turn. All the +1s, +2s, +5s, -1s, -2s, etc. The second math problem is that the designers did not get the math correct initially. The core books have DCs that are too high, making that part of the game too difficult, and the characters' attacks and defenses didn't scale quite well enough to keep up with the monsters' scaling. A short ways into 4E's lifespan, WotC released an errata with new DCs, but they were now too low. That made things too easy. And their fix for the characters was to include powerful feats in Player's Handbook 2 that increased the characters' baseline numbers. Their fortitude, will, dexterity, AC. These feats were so good and considered so necessary that they came to be known as feat tax. Then later on, WotC released yet another errata for the DCs, this time finally getting things right. Like all editions of D&D, 4E has many flaws, but we should not discount its strengths, which are also many. Moving up to second place, we have 3E, 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons, more commonly referred to as 3.5. It has a strong and deep rule set. Really, really deep. It's almost staggering how robust and complex this game is. This is the most simulationist version of D&D ever, attempting to capture a high degree of realism through the rules. This also turns out to be one of those its strength is its weakness situations. On the one hand, you can do so much with 3E. The vast variety of characters you can create is breathtaking. But on the other hand, there are so many rules and so much to remember and reference and so many options that you have to weed through. Once you get beyond the low to mid levels of play, the complexity of 3E is beyond what human beings can reasonably handle. The cognitive load required for the DM, especially when running and designing for mid to high levels, is just brutal. Look at these monster stat blocks. You have to absorb all their unique abilities and traits and remember what all their feats do. The monsters have just as many feats as the player characters. And remember or be able to reference what all the spells do. And then, of course, be able to roleplay their personality and their combat tactics. And to top it all off, there's all of this on-the-fly number crunching that gets to absurd levels with constant situational bonuses and penalties coming and going. There's a lot that could be said about 3E. In many ways, it set the game on a really strong course, but in other ways, it got lost within itself. And in first place of the rules ranking, we have 5E. 5th edition D&D opened up an entire new era for the game. Like anything that is wildly successful, there are all kinds of opinions about this game. But if we look at it as a rule set on its own merits, the plain truth is that 5E is an excellent game. It is more user-friendly and more pleasantly formatted. It trims out most of the fiddly number crunching and the clunkiness. It trims out so much of the weeds that you have to bushwhack through in the earlier editions, and it introduces the advantage and disadvantage system, which is one of the smoothest, most elegant, most enjoyable TTRPG mechanics of all time. 5E focuses on a streamlined game that is made to flow during gameplay. This allows GMs and players to spend more time and attention on the action, on the role-playing, on the immersion. It seeks a middle ground between the crunch of 3E and 4E with the agency of GM rulings found in early D&D. And it's also a great system for modding and customizing. Of course, it's not without its flaws. If you follow the official encounter building guidelines for using multiple monsters in an encounter, using that effective XP multiplier, then the combats will be too easy. And this problem just gets worse and worse the higher level the characters are. The 5.5e revision did fix this major problem. It got rid of that XP multiplier. So that's one thing that 5.5 got right, among other things that probably didn't get so right. Another common issue with 5e is that the characters are too powerful, with too many safety nets, and the monsters aren't quite strong enough. The real issue here is actually not in game design, but that the game is not clear enough telling GMs, and all players really, that this system is intended for characters to go through lots and lots of danger, lots of encounters between rests. Another flaw is that certain character options are suboptimal. Some are just strictly worse, while others are very powerful. Now, this is a problem that exists in all editions of D&D. But in 5e, in which lots of the excess is trimmed off, the options that we do have should all be solid and viable. There shouldn't be some subclasses or some feats that way outshine the others. There's much debate as to whether the 5.5e version is better or not, and well, is complicated. But despite certain problems, the core of 5e as a TTRPG rule set is exceptionally stable, solid, and smooth. And now we move on to the style ranking. This is mainly about the artistic quality of the game. How does it look in the illustrations, in the layout? What's the tone of it? Also, the lore factors into this one as well. As much as the rules are incredibly important, D&D isn't just rules. The books are also art books, and many people's first experience with D&D is looking at the visuals. Of course, this is ultimately an imagination-based storytelling game, but the imagery and the lore found in the books does influence the world in your head and the spirit of the game that we all share in when we gather. Starting off at 6th place, we have od&d. Original D&D sits at the bottom in terms of style. I don't want to be too harsh here because this was the very rough early stage of the game. There are no big budgets. There's very little prior experience to draw upon. This is new territory. Really, these are some wargaming nerds geeking out over making the first ever fantasy RPG. The illustrations in the book unfortunately look like middle school or high school doodles. That does have a little bit of charm to it, I have to admit, but obviously it's not what the designers or the fans of the game would have really wanted. The lore starts off very, very sparse, very bare bones, but it gets the ball rolling. Moving up to 5th place, we have 5e. 5th edition D&D started off decently strong with the style in the core rulebooks. It was new school for sure, but here and there you could find touches of the old school sense of appreciation for masterful paintings and a sense of realism and history that goes along balancing out the ultra-high magic. But it also is kind of bland. The creative variety that's found in almost all the other editions of the game is gone, and instead everything just looks the same. It's all this safe for modern audiences, generic fantasy style. Again, it doesn't start off bad, but it's not exactly inspiring or gripping. And as the edition goes on, things unfortunately end up declining into pop fantasy and corporate fantasy. The quality peaks, I would say, in 2018 with Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, and after that it starts to slip. By the time we're into late 5e and the 5.5e Player's Handbook, the illustrations are more often annoying than anything. But to be fair, the 5.5e Monster Manual does have some great illustrations in it. It's really worth looking at those art pieces. And if you look through all the 5e books, you can still find some gems here and there. Certain books do have some great pieces, such as the pen illustrations by Luke Inc. in Adventures in Faerun, which I was stunned to come across. But that's just one adventure in one book. In terms of lore, 5e started off more generalized, and as the books came out, the lore did deepen a bit, but there were no Dungeon or Dragon magazines anymore, and D&D Beyond articles were nowhere remotely close to their level. Then came that big shift that I mentioned that occurred late in 5e and into 5.5e, and unfortunately much of the lore was either stripped out entirely or turned into contrived, newfangled versions that do not respect what came before. Generally speaking, the lore of 5e is generic, it's minimal, and it's safe and approved. In other words, kryptonite to real art. So the style of 5e really runs quite a gamut. It goes from great to so-so to soulless to outright betrayal by a corporation desperate to pander for mass appeal. Because of that, I just can't put 5e any higher in the style ranking. In 4th place, we have 4th edition. 4e is a strange case when it comes to style. It's both bad and good all at once. On the one hand, it turns its back on the style spectrum that D&D had expressed in all the previous editions. An over-the-top Warcraft or even Disney look is found in a number of the illustrations. The desperation to appeal to younger video game players reeks from many of the pages. Bright, happy colors, simplified forms, ridiculous proportions, overly thick armor, cartoon superhero characters and monsters. On the other hand, there truly are a number of talented artists doing illustrations for 4e, And they essentially carry the torch of 3E's style, and they continue it or expand upon it. There are more illustrations that do not look like Warcraft than do. This is still an edition where you can look through the books and discover artists with unique signature styles, producing works of art that are interesting, that are creative, that are inspiring. There is still personality here, even though by this point, fantasy illustrations in general had veered hard into 2000s and 2010s era digital art, which often gives things a look that's too clean, too sleek and shiny. It lacks texture and human soul. The lore of 4E is better than many people realize. Not necessarily amazing, but actually pretty good in some respects. For example, its Nintir Vale campaign setting is highly regarded. It has a lot of internal consistency, it has focus, it has personality to it. I have to admit, it is hard to say whether 4E or 5E has a better style. In some ways, it is actually 5E, but then 5E shoots itself in the foot with its tame blandness and its corporate sludge. Moving up to third place, we have 3E. Third edition D&D has a lot of really great art and some of the coolest book covers ever. I really wanted to put 3E higher up on this ranking. In fact, I would say in my mind 3E is tied for second place. But I'll concede it to third place just because of how phenomenal and iconic the next two are. Also, 3E is when video game and pop influence started creeping into the art. And indeed, something is lost from the elements of realism and history that should be there to help counterbalance the fantastical elements. But there's so much positive I could say about the style of 3E. It's really creative. It allowed for lots of different artists with different personal styles to contribute. 3E solidified the careers of many highly talented artists, and it still had grit and guts to it. That part had not been lost yet. The lore of 3E started off fairly sparse and limited with the core books, but it wasn't long before the smorgasbord of supplements and adventures and Dungeon and Dragon magazines took things really deep. For a balance of old school and new school, and for a sheer breadth of creativity, 3E is unmatched. In second place on the style ranking, we have first edition. So 1E, D&D, and ad&d really kick things up in terms of style compared to the crude drawings of original D&D. Now, at the very start of 1E, you can still find some of those high school doodle type illustrations, like this one from the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide. It shows characters disguising themselves with Mickey Mouse ears. Or this one from the AD&D Player's Handbook, with a warrior slipping on a banana peel and sloppily written "oops" over his head. But that very same book has the amazing, iconic cover with the adventurers prying out a gemstone eye from the giant demon statue. Basically, 1E begins with inconsistent art quality. That's probably just due to a lack of budget and proper art directing. But D&D blows up, and the creators come into the big bucks, and the art quality quickly goes up, consistently becoming phenomenal. Throughout the 80s, there is so much amazing artwork in these books. Seeing work from artists like Larry Elmore, Clyde Caldwell, and Jeff Easley come into the books is a treasure to behold. The lore of 1E starts off definitely on the simpler side, but over the course of several years of books and Dungeon and Dragon magazines, it builds into a tremendous force with deep, mythic lore and a tone that goes to dark and challenging places at times. Again, I think 1E might be tied for 3E overall for style, at least it is in my head, but I'll give the tiebreaker to 1E. And in first place, we have 2E. The top of the style ranking is second edition AD&D. It takes the direction the style was going in first edition and kicks it up even better. These books are an absolute pleasure to look at, whether it's the masterwork paintings that are on the covers and full-page interior illustrations, or the black and white or blue and white interior drawings. There's so much human heart Such passion, such texture and grit, such personality. The artistic quality on display here is just amazing. The lore of 2E continues what was happening before and deepens and expands it. We also get more campaign settings. Some great, intriguing settings begin in 2E. Ravenloft gets expanded into a full-fledged setting. And there's Dark Sun, and Planescape, and many others. Like 1st edition before it, and in many ways 3rd edition after it, the style of 2nd edition is strong. And that glorious strength flows from the pages like a mythic river leading to the land of high adventure. You look at these pages and you see echoes of Aragorn and Gandalf, Legolas and Gimli, Arwen and Galadriel, Frodo and Sam, King Arthur and Merlin, Robin Hood, Aladdin, Sinbad, Conan, Elric, Odysseus, Achilles, Beowulf, and all those grand bearers, the torch of inspiration. It's very difficult to say if a single edition of D&D is the best. So much depends on what you enjoy and what you want out of the experience. Play original D&D if you want to experience the roots, the origin of D&D, the origin of RPGs for that matter. It's chaotic, it's exploratory, and the DM has to fill in a lot of the blanks. Play one of the variations of 1st edition or 2nd edition if you want a classic experience in a dangerous survival game where player ingenuity and DM rulings often drive the experience. The style is more mythic, more medieval, more gritty. Play 3rd edition if you want a game that strikes a middle ground between old school and new school. It has an incredible amount of crunch, a vast array of character build options, and a more structured rule set. Or play 4E if you want a tactical, miniatures skirmish RPG. It's more mechanics driven, it's more like a board game. It tries out some new things that were never before featured in D&D. Or play 5e if you want a smooth, streamlined system. If you want a game that has a massive player base. If you want a game that's flexible and uncomplicated, that's great for new players and relatively easy to mod. And if its style is not your jam, there are tons of amazing third-party products out there, or you can create your own setting that has the style that you like the best. For me personally, as a GM and a creator, I like to use the 5e rule set along with my own campaign setting. Its style is more inspired by the styles of 2E and 3E. In my opinion, that is the best of both worlds, and I love it. I cannot express how grateful I am for getting to work and to game in this realm, and for everyone who shares it with me. And on a related note, I want to give a special thank you to everyone who supports this channel over on my Patreon. In particular, Modern Patron, Adam Wood, Jared Primont, Locke, Ben R., James from KC, Technicolor Shale, Tornado, and Agile Monk. You guys make such a difference. And to everyone out there, if you would like to become a supporter as well, go check out Esper the Bard on Patreon. It gets you access to some great monthly rewards, including expanded versions of my monthly newsletter and RPG map, as well as a monthly drawing for your pick of reward. You can also check out my online shop on esperthebard.com. There you can find my books and PDFs that have quality content for GMs and players. 5e rules with a more mythic and gritty style. Links for everything are below in the video description and pinned comment. Until we meet again, my brave companions, may your adventures be many.